Welcome back to No Joke Survival.
Preparations for the average family.
I'm Jason.
And I'm James.
And in today's episode, we're talking about first aid and why it's so important to have some sort of first aid kit in your home in case something happens. And we have a guest speaker today.
I do believe we do have a guest speaker.
So we should have Danny bring him in.
So
Danny!
Pastor! I guess. No, but seriously, it's getting towards that time of year. This is Dan Andraka, and I'm going to actually have to segue out here so we can work on our beginner's box. So
cool.
I will be back.
Thank you, Danny.
You're welcome.
Dan, welcome.
How's it going?
Thanks for having us on your show.
And
I think it's the other way around.
that's your show now. We're not in charge. You
We're
are.
in trouble.
We do that to all the guests. So tell us a little bit about yourself real quick.
Well, I'm a member of Seaboard Search and Rescue with Jason. I've been doing that for about 3 years. I'm also involved in a program called Civil Air Patrol, where it's a youth organization where it's associated with the Air Force, and we do wilderness search and rescue and aerospace education, a couple other good things. And I've been involved in research and rescue and emergency medicine for about 5 or 6 years now, and currently a licensed EMT, and I'm working on my nursing license.
Fantastic.
Very cool.
And take a breath.
That was a mouthful. But it's good to know that we're here with somebody who knows what they're talking about, you know?
Yeah, we could have used you on the last episode. We were kind of
What'd you do to yourself in the last episode?
not quite as safe as we should have been with some potato peelers.
Yes, it was quite dangerous. We almost lost an eye.
How does one lose an eye with a potato peeler?
You'll have to tune back later.
That's
for the
right. So we're talking about why it's so important to have first aid items in your home. Mm-hmm. And so maybe you could give us kind of a brief overview of what are the most important items to have for basic first aid.
Well, really, the most important thing to have for basic first aid is knowledge. There's a limit to what gear you need for first aid. You need gauze of various sorts. You need some sort of disinfectant. But even if you don't have those things, you can use a T-shirt to stop bleeding. You can use soap and water as a disinfectant if you have nothing else. So the most important thing is to get the right training, understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, so everything else sort of follows from there.
And that's a good point, and I think it'll come up later in the beginner's box, but a book on first aid. In today's world, we rely so much on the internet and technology. However, when that crisis hits, we don't know if we're going to have internet, and you don't want to rely on that. So you have to have a book of first aid, basic first aid, because you don't also want to just rely on your memory, and you don't want to kind of self-diagnose. You're already stressed out. It's already a bad situation. If someone were to get hurt badly, you're not in that normal frame of mind. So having something else to reference is really important.
Yeah, I agree too. And at home myself, I have 2 or 3 books, and sometimes when you're at a thrift store, if you go through their books, you'll find some really good first aid ones there. And I found one that's very complete, goes through everything from bee stings to literally making a splint for somebody. It's really, you're right, the books are absolutely great thing to have, especially if the internet goes down.
Yeah. And there's also like a number of courses that are free, right?
Well, maybe not a free course, but you can find relatively inexpensive courses on basic first aid and that sort of thing. And then beyond that, if someone had an interest in, sort of advanced level first aid, one thing you might look into is the certified first responder license, where it's not quite an EMT class, but it goes into much more advanced medicine than your average first aid class.
But like your CPR classes, I mean, those are frequent. I see them advertised all the time. The local colleges have a number of different varying degrees of first aid, basic, intro. So it's something that you can educate yourself on, which is always important.
And then, of course, we're saying don't rely on the internet, but before the disaster takes place, to educate yourself, the internet is a great tool. You can find all sorts of information on there.
Yeah, I was looking at practicing with some sutures, and there's videos like with a banana or like
you can find video on anything on the internet.
Pretty much, yeah.
But I thought that would be fun to practice my sutures.
That is a good idea. I never actually thought about that before. Yeah, I was thinking you were going to like cut yourself and then repair it. No, not that way. But, so banana makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, because I guess it has a similar texture to skin or something.
Right.
You know? So some other items that are going to be important are going to be some sort of meds.
Right. You know, basically, you know, you need to start with any prescription drug you take on a regular basis, because you know, when whatever happens, likely you're not going to be able to restock on your prescription meds. So you need to have more than you would usually keep on hand in case you can't restock. And after that, you know, some basic over-the-counter stuff, painkillers like you know, Tylenol or ibuprofen.
People with allergies might want to
People with
stock up on
allergies,
allergy medicine.
again, you know, anything that you use on a regular basis, you're going to want plenty of. Cold medicine, cough drops, etc. And then the other thing, if you can find if you can get your family physician or someone else to prescribe it for you, keeping some antibiotics on hand would not be a bad idea.
Yeah, and even on top of that, some of the not so glamorous medicines like anti-diarrheal.
Right.
I mean, it's really critical because
Right.
you know, if you have diarrhea, you're losing a lot of fluids.
Right.
Yep, you get
And
really
then
dehydrated.
That goes into your stock of water, trying to replenish them, and
course.
so it'll run down your body pretty quick. All those types of things you should think about ahead of time and have those in place.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there are a variety of over-the-counter medications that you can keep in your first aid as well, right?
Right. Basically, anything you would keep in your medicine cabinet at home, anything you use on a fairly regular basis, you should have duplicates of in your first aid kit. So if your medicine cabinet stock runs out and you can't resupply for whatever reason, you still have enough to take care of yourself.
Right.
And you know, another avenue, and we're going to touch on this in a future episode, is herbal medicines. There are a number of people that like to use tinctures or natural herbs for healing. And again, it's just a matter of doing the research, because there's so much information out there and there's so many different things. You could probably be growing some of your own herbs or plants that you could use in an emergency situation.
Very true.
Honestly, I can't really speak to that because I've never really done the research on herbal medicines, but it's a viable resource if you do the research.
Yeah.
And what about surgical equipment for first aid? Is that another good thing that you should have with you? I mean, obviously, you know,
Well,
you're not
my take on surgical equipment is you shouldn't have it if you don't know how to use it. And you know, I'm not trained in any kind of surgical procedures, so in my first aid kit I don't have any of that stuff because I don't know what I'm doing with it. And honestly, you can do more harm than good with that sort of thing if you don't really know what you're doing.
And speaking of which, we have some of those items in our beginner's box, so let's bring in Dani. Dani!
Oh, my beginner's box! All right. Well, I'm going to just pull these top two out real quick. So, educate yourself. I mean, really great idea to have some first aid books. This one's actually a book on, food and nutrition, so you can kind of work to prevent anything minor, colds and whatnot, so eating healthy. We have some basic things like cough drops. There's hydrogen peroxide, which, no one should ever be without.
Dan,
on that note, hydrogen peroxide is not really my go-to for a disinfectant because it's not as effective as something like isopropyl alcohol, and it also, the way it works is the way it interacts with your cells, it can actually cause tissue damage when you pour it on a wound. So it's not going to encourage healing as well as a different disinfectant like alcohol. So this would be my recommendation, not this.
No. But it still works as a backup if that's all people have.
It'll work if that's all you can get your hands on, but this is superior.
Okay.
Is it a good idea to dilute that with a little bit of, if you have purified water?
I don't see that it would change anything really.
Okay.
So we have a representation of extra medication.
James, what did you do?
I was hungry. There were diet pills.
Those weren't candies.
Oh man, I was wondering.
Speaking of candies, we have. My mom had always taught us, just some hard candies because they last. You can't say that they've gone bad and they're stale because they're hard candies. But if you have someone who's, going into a diabetic shock or whatnot, and their blood sugar's just bottomed out, that's, something that can hopefully, exactly. Yeah. And now we have gloves.
I think this kind of goes along with the surgical And, you know, it may be kind of scary to think about having to do that on your own, but if I were in an emergency situation, I couldn't get to a hospital and I had a wound that was deep enough for it, you can get sutures.
Right.
And you can have gloves, and if you have as sterile equipment as possible, boil it if need be, you can fumble through a surgery.
Right.
Hopefully you have the pain meds to go along with it.
And the education as well.
Right, but that's like a last resort if you can't get to a hospital.
And, you know, on the gloves, you always want to be carrying some kind of, you know, barrier device like gloves, because, you know, if you're treating someone else's wound, it's not so much a concern if you're treating yourself, but you're treating someone else's wound. You don't know what pathogens they might have in their blood that, you know, may not be causing symptoms for them, but if you catch it, you could get a disease. So always, you don't want to touch someone else's bodily fluids, because it's just not good.
Yep.
Especially since that nuclear reactor thing exposure that James had.
Yeah,
you know.
that's why I got so much hair. I had short hair yesterday, so.
Well, there's nothing wrong with long hair. So
Okay.
this actually, next up, this is a Stops Bleeding Fast. I'm actually not super familiar, but it's just a different clotting sponge, different kind of items to help.
If you don't mind, the quick clot is actually something that was developed for the military. It's there's a compound in it that's derived from shellfish that basically speeds the clotting process.
Okay.
And
Nice.
the gauze has this compound in it, and when you apply it to a wound, it'll clot faster than it would with normal gauze. Now, the one thing to keep in mind, if you use that on someone with a shellfish allergy, you could cause an anaphylactic reaction and kill them.
Know your allergies for
Exactly.
sure.
Yeah.
So we
Definitely
have,
research it on the internet. Come back after the break. We'll have some more information for you, as well as a fun little contest.
Yeah, we're going to have a great contest. We're going to actually get to use some of these items.
oh no.
And we thank you for joining us.
And we appreciate all the tips.
Some
It's,
aspirin here.
This stuff is really good.
Yeah.
This basket.